I thought I would show you how I mix paint on my palettes. And I know I've said this before, but I like to use a knife. And the thing is, I can control the knife and I can control how much paint is on there really effectively, especially a knife that sharp. So I can just dip that knife in and get just a tiny bit of paint on there. And sometimes I'll wipe off a little bit on the side like you're seeing there. Just so you know, every time I mix with the palette knife and then go to another color, I'm wiping off on a rag. And that's so that I'm not contaminating the other paints with that pigment that's on my knife. So I know this sounds like it's wasteful, like you're wasting time, but I feel like this is how to avoid getting muddy colors, and it also helps me to go faster when I get to actually paint. I like to make what's called a mother pile. It's where you make a big pile of paint. In this case, I'm trying to make Josie's fur. And then from that big pile, I'll divide it up into smaller piles and I'll slightly adjust it, either increasing the value, like I'll make it darker, or I'll add a color to it to warm it or cool that color. When I'm doing my mixing, I'm also doing this. I'm taking a palette knife with the color on it and I hold it up to what I'm trying to color match. And I do this both when I work from reference photographs, but also I do it from life too. I'll close one eye and put my palette knife up against the area I'm trying to match, and I'll see how close I am in value and in temperature to the area I'm trying to match. Value is more important than actually matching the exact color. Oil paints work best if you save the highlights for last, and I am in the practice of working from dark to light. That helps me to figure out the value pattern. So that's what I'm doing on Josie. I blocked in some of the darker values. Now they are different. They're not all the same degree of dark. And I also was looking for things like, is it a warm dark or is it a cooler dark? And I block those in first. The direction on her coat is important to suggest fur. I'm sure you guys know that. I'm using curvy strokes. I also like to flick my brush a lot. So anyway, I'm working on those darker areas first, and then I'm going to go into the mid-tones, and then I'm going to last put in the highlights. When you're dipping your brush into the paint, it is appropriate and okay to kind of rehydrate your brush with a little bit of that oil chalk dust mixture. I usually dip my brush in there and kind of wipe on the palette a little bit, so I'm not like, it's not a super saturated brush, and then you go in for your paint. You can mix the oils directly into your paint so that oil mixture can go right into the paint. Either one is fine. But I like to use it best, I guess, as an extender to get it to flow. Flow means how well it goes onto the surface. You can thin oils down to the consistency of watercolors. Some artists do. I'd advise, like, don't go quite that thin, but I also would say, like, don't go too thick. It's good to build, and I'm hoping that these will have time to dry over the weekend, and by the time Monday rolls around, they should be somewhat dry and you can put a second coat. So I took a little bit of time off camera blocking in her body, and I noticed that her body's kind of purpley and just more cool than her face. Her face tends to be a little bit warmer in this picture, so I added some violets in there. Now my intent is to let the body be not quite as described as the face. I don't think I need to, especially the parts of the body that are going farther back in space. So generally things that are closer to us appear more in focus, but as a painter, you should have the most in focus area be in the middle ground. And I am carving in those shadows. That's what I'm doing on the feet to get those tight curls. I'm looking at the shape of the shadows and curving that in with my brush. So I'm laying in those brush strokes and I'm curving it and trying to mimic that. Because Josie's the obvious focal point, I do need to spend some time fussing with her and trying to replicate the texture of the fur. Of course, you know this, but it's important to suggest form with the fur. So how you lay down the stroke, can imply form. So you just want to have that in mind as you're working. The nice thing about oils is you can rework them like right now. Like you don't have to wait for it to dry, and they're very malleable. You can kind of push them around. I kind of like to think of the brush as like a big scrub broom, and I can blend things and move it around. Now it is possible for you to get muddy brushes. That's why I have a variety of brushes I use. So I typically use like 5 or 6. I do have some extra brushes if you'd like to switch out your brushes, um, so that you have different brushes assigned for different things. At this stage, Josie is mostly blocked in. I'm going to go ahead and work on the area around her. And again, it doesn't have to be as detailed or complex as other areas. So the basic goal is to try and get the whole tone covered. I mean, you can leave little flecks of the tone exposed. I told you some artists like to do that. Other artists are like very vigilant about covering everything. Kind of your choice on that. I just wouldn't leave big open areas. So you're covering everything. The thing is, what's great about oil paint is you don't have to necessarily paint it all at one time. In fact, my approach when I paint is typically to put at least 2 coats. I think I told you 4 is ideal. So 3 to 4 is an ideal amount of paint that I put on each painting before I put it in a show or I sell it. It's amazing what happens between coat 1, coat 2, coat 3, because it gets more refined, and I can address things like if, for instance, like that pillow got kind of muddy as I worked on it because I painted on top and I lightened it and I had some other colors on my brush. I can fix that so easily in a second coat. And I can make little adjustments like to the background. Like there was an area right between Josie's front leg and her back leg where it looks kind of flat. I can fix that in a second coat. So I guess I'm saying, like, don't be upset if it's not like perfect or if it's getting a little bit murky. That's the nice thing about oil paint is you can go back and give it a second coat. I always feel like my painting gets stronger the more coats I put on it. Like it looks solid or more solid in places and less transparent. Like I can get that nose to have more of an ombre on it. So anyway, don't be upset if it's not perfect. Now, I did tell you, you have permission to edit things. So, like, I'm simplifying the patterns on there. I'm not doing every single pattern. I'm doing some of them. But others, I'm going to take artistic license and play with it. You can also do that, too. You can add elements that aren't there if you wanted to. I don't mind. So, you can have some freedom, especially in that background area. Briefly, I want to show you how to clean up a palette. Now this is my palette at home, so it's quite a bit bigger, but you want to scrape all the minor pools of paint. These are all the paint piles that you pre-mixed. I would save any big piles of paint and put it onto that gray palette paper, and we're going to keep that for now inside of the pencil box, and we're going to try and reuse that if we can. So the paint that's left on the palette, you need to wipe onto your rag. So there is no paper towel here. You're just going to use your rag to clean up. If you have any residual oil, and it's actually better if you don't, you use it on the painting, then you need to wipe that up. I don't know if you saw there, but I'm taking my excess paint. If you do have a lot of excess paint, you don't want to save it, you can put it on a piece of palette paper and let it dry out. You never want to throw away wet paint. Also, I want to point out that I still have gloves on. You should wear gloves like pretty much the moment you come in here if you're going to paint in oils, and you don't take them off until like a second before the bell rings. And then I do advocate for saving those gloves. I have clothespins out. Maybe write your name on the clothespin and then use that to clip your gloves out so they can dry. So I reuse my gloves maybe like 15 times before I replace them. You could have like 2 pairs of gloves you can cycle through as well. So they're going to go on that drying rack, and that drying rack is going to be set outside every day so it can air out and dry out. When you're taking the gloves off, you want to make sure you don't flip them inside out, which is easy to do. You kind of have to pull on the fingers with your other hand while you do it.